Well, what I would like to do in the, I have 3 hours, 5 hours?
6.
6? Who said that?
Nobody.
All right. What I would like to do is really to divide my presentation into something like 3 parts. The first part, with your permission, I'll just introduce very briefly the field of future studies, because still many people think I'm gazing in the stars. And I'm going to speak about some very interesting trends. I would like you to know that those trends are not some insights, but some very analytical conclusions from different mathematical and statistical models. The other part would be introduce you to the major mega trends of world Jewry in the 21st century. And then what I would like to discuss with you is some of the challenges. Actually, I believe there are 2 challenges that are ahead of us in 21st century as a peoplehood and specifically as a Zionist movement. And then I believe there will be a lot of questions, but we'll see later. So let's start. A little bit what I really would like to do is to let you understand that for many, many years, a lot of people were trying to figure out the future of Israel specifically and of the Zionist movement. All of those people, and I have been collecting a lot of data in the last few decades about this issue. What I found is that most of the people that were trying to figure out the future of the Jewish people have failed miserably. And what I would like to do is to introduce you to the reason I believe they have all missed the big picture. And basically speaking, they have used a very unreliable methodology with which they were trying to figure out the future. I believe that many people nowadays, even nowadays, are still using unreliable methodologies whenever they are speaking about the future of Israel, the future of world Jewry. So I would introduce you to a methodology with which we will try to a little bit enhance the reliability of our predictions. So, first thing I would like to, of course, address is the characteristic of the challenges that those mega trends are having in the door for us. In order to do that, what I would like to do is give you a perspective, a larger perspective of the 21st century, a world perspective, the world mega trends. Because we are all in a historical context. We are not detached from context. And then we'll discuss some of the challenges and some of the mega trends that are really very characteristic of the Jewish people. So let's start. A little bit about methodologies, about the way we as futurists are studying the future. I'm aware of tons of methodologies, mathematical models, statistical models. I'm not going to elaborate. The basic assumption in future studies is that there is logic how systems are evolving. That's the whole issue. And we are trying to understand how systems are evolving. Whenever we stumble upon a logic or maybe just a pattern, we tend to give it a figure that reflects its reliability, and with that model we are trying to figure out the next stage of a system. So basically, future studies is another branch of sciences nowadays, which is what we call systems thinking or systems theory. Okay, the problem is that all of us, we are futurists, whether we like it or not. Okay, one of the most important characteristics of the human mind is that it is constantly thinking about the future. Constantly. By the way, only just a few years ago, they have discovered the exact place, location in the mind, the human mind in which we are generating futures thinking. which is a fascinating field. We found out if you touch it somehow, destroy, a bit of that region, then the person stops thinking about even an hour ahead. Fascinating issue, but that's not the issue of what I would like to discuss today. The other problem is that most of us, whenever we are thinking about the future, whether we are aware of it or not, we are using just one methodology, which is called linear extrapolation. That's what all of us are doing, without even being aware of it. And this methodology says the following: if you are here in the present and you would like to figure out what's going to happen 5, 10 years ahead, what you do is you go to the past and you collect data as much as possible. The more you have data, the more the past is far away, the better. What you do with that data, you just figure out the vector and then you extrapolate the vector. That's what we all do, whether we are aware of it or not. The problem is that the reliability of this model is really very, very low. Somebody would like to guess how much is the reliability of this model? Which means when you do such a thinking and you come to a conclusion about what's going to happen in the future, how much this model assures you that whatever you think is going to happen at the end? Percentage-wise, what do you think? 50 at least, otherwise we won't do it. Well, statistically, it depends on a lot of things. I'm speaking about average thing, okay? In statistics, it's called the predictive reliability of the model, which means how sure we are that we really understand the logic of a system, and we tend to give it a figure. Well, we're speaking about at best 30%. Now, 30%, it's not nil, it's not nothing. The problem is that when you are aware that at best 30% of what you think is going to happen and you're still using it, that's the problem. And that's, I believe, what happened to a lot of thinkers during the last century. A lot of people use this methodology without even, paying attention that there is a methodology behind their assumptions. And that's why probably most of their predictions turn to be really incorrect. Most of the time they have failed totally into understanding the trends. So I said to myself, as a futurist, can I suggest a different methodology and use that methodology in order to understand world Jewry and Israeli trends more specifically of the 21st century? And that's what I did, and I'm going to discuss in a moment. Now, I believe that you all agree that at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, there are almost no systems that are evolving in a linear way. Everything has become so complex, so accelerating in manners that we couldn't even imagine 30, 40 years ago. So the curves that describe nowadays the evolvement of systems are becoming very bizarre. Now, for most of the people, those bizarre patterns of our curves, for most of the people, it's chaos. It's impossible to predict. But even chaos, nowadays we know that chaos is a higher order of a system, of an order, of an ancient order. Just for this very simple phrase, somebody received a Nobel Prize in the 80s. So there is logic, even within systems that looks like very chaotic. And we tend to try to see and to understand that logic. We have nowadays tons of curves that describes a lot of phenomena. This is just, a very ancient paper that describes a potpourri kind of models. I'll give you just one or two examples. This model for this curve describes, for example, was developed, by the way, in the 70s. It's called the Zygmunt curve because of named after the person that developed that curve. Its reliability, by the way, is something between 70 to 75%, which is a lot. I hope you understand. Saying now 70% reliability about something, that's really amazing. Let me just stress, if I'm already mentioning it, that we as a species, we are very primitive in understanding how systems are evolving. Okay, 50 years from now, a century from now, we will understand systems in a different way. But at this point, when we say that we have some understanding of the system that can be measured in a, let's say, 50, 60, 70%, that means really an amazing achievement. Okay? So the reliability of this curve is about 70%, and it describes the life cycle of almost any technology in terms of sales. It seems that all technologies go through a very clear life cycle, an average life cycle, and a curve of ups and downs that repeats itself in almost every technology. Now, let's say Intel are coming to me and asking me to help them estimate the sales of laptops 5-10 years ahead. How do I do it? So the idea is to figure out the relevant curve that really is relevant to the specific issue I'm asked to help. And let's say I decided that this is the curve that reflects that specific dilemma. I take that curve and start, collecting data and put that data on the curve. And let's say I decide, or I come to a conclusion that we are, in terms of sales of laptops, we are at this point. So I come to Intel and I say, this is the methodology I'm using. This is its reliability. I believe we are somehow here, and I calculate for them how many sales, what's the the amount of sales will be 5 years ahead according to that curve. And I'm stressing, don't take your decisions just upon this model, because it's only 7% reliability, but bring that knowledge into the decision making and somehow ameliorate, if you wish, your tools with which you are doing whatever you're doing. Okay, I think that's enough. We have tons, really. I don't have time here to go and give you a lot of samples of examples how we do it. I believe you already feel that this is a huge discipline. We have tons of academic venues in which every month people are scholars from all over the world are publishing new models. We are constantly trying to tune up those models. There are conferences and we are debating, and there are schools of thought like in any other academic discipline. Well, I think that's enough for this very brief introduction. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to really give you some sense of the larger picture of humanity in the 21st century. I'm going to take a bird's eye perspective. It's not an easy thing to do, but I'll try to do it. I'll try to take a bird's eye from a perspective that is very relevant to our issue today, which is the perspective of demographies of the 21st century. By the way, the demography variable is what we call the fate variable. Everything that is happening to us as individuals, as collectives, as groups, is defined by the demographies in which we are embedded. So let me give you the large picture of the 21st century, and then I'm going to show you how the Jewish people is going to probably experience the 21st century. You'll see the differences, and then I'm going to discuss a little bit the challenges that are going to derive from that difference, if you wish. Okay, let's speak about human demographies. All right, of course, from a scientific point of view, I'm not going to go into that issue at this moment. From a scientific point of view, as much as we understand about 12,000 years ago, there were about between 1 million to 5 million people on Earth. Okay, by the way, about 60,000 years ago, there were on this planet about 10,000 people only. Okay, I'm stressing this point just to give you some sense of what kind of changes humanity is going through. Okay, if I'll be able to remember it later on, I'll tell you even a personal story about 60,000 years back. Okay? And then humanity barely was growing. Okay? There were even times in which humanity had lost population. But humanity managed to just go over those kind of times until about 2,000 years ago, humanity reached the 250 million mark. But when we reached that mark, we started as a species to grow in an exponential curve, which means it took humanity about 1,800 years to quadruple this number and reach the 1 billion mark. But when we reached that 1 billion mark, we really then started to go on amok, which means it took humanity about 130 years only, and we have doubled to 2 billion people. And then only 30 years, 3 billion people. 15 years, 4 billion. 12 years, you see what I mean? This is an amazing, this is what we call a exponential curve. All right? Now bear with me. Whenever we stumble upon a curve such as this, in any system, any natural system, we know there is no natural system that grows in such a pattern that will be able to continue to grow. We know that in nature there is no such a thing. Always two things are happening. Either something happens here and the whole system collapses, or something happens here and then the curve takes a turn to a different direction. And what remains to study is not whether something is going to happen, but when and what. You're a futurist already. Yeah. All right. So let's discuss a little bit when and what. We're speaking about humanity, okay, of the 21st century, and then we're going to speak about Israel and Jewish people. Let me just drink something. Okay, how many people on Earth at this very moment? Somebody knows? 7? Okay. Formally, we are 7.5 billion people. However, we tend to add at least 200 more million people that are not accounted. Every place, every nation, they have a different term to describe those people. Okay, in Israel they are called Shabachim. In the US they are called Undocumented. I don't know how they are called in Australia. Do you have a term for it?
Conservative.
Conservative. That's a good one. All right. Okay. In China they are called floating populations, stuff like that. Anyway, this is a very important group. Whenever we are trying to figure out, world conflict, we tend to focus on this variable also. It doesn't matter. What I would like to stress is that almost anything that happened in the last century was because of this figure. From world wars to this very nice technology we all have in hand. Without so many people on Earth, you and me will not be able to use this kind of, to have it even, in our hands. Okay, in economies it's called economies of scale. Just remember it when I'll be speaking about the future. How many people will be on Earth by 2050? What do you think? We should know already because it's been published all over. 9.5? Okay, about 3-4 years ago, the estimates were that there will be about between 11 billion people to 13 billion people. However, in the last few years, we have discovered a few trends. I'm going to mention them in the next slide. And because of those trends, the estimates at this point are indeed that by 2050, humanity will be around 10 billion people. Okay, plus minus. Now, which means by all means, that means that in a matter of 250 years only, humanity will go from 1 billion to 10 billion. And think about the challenges that are, accompanying this trend. Think about the pros and cons. We don't have time to elaborate. However, I'm very much interested in how many people will be on this planet by the end of the 21st century. And I'm very much interested because of two reasons. First of all, you don't know it yet, but all you guys, the young people here, 20, 30 years old, you will be still around. That's another problem. You don't know it yet, but it's a problem, believe me. Okay? So in any case, most of the people that are going to be at the end of the 21st century are alive already. Most of our kids are alive. So we're not speaking about somebody else. We're speaking about some of us here and, of course, all of our kids. So I'm very much interested because I know that something big is going to change and fundamentally shake their faith. So how many people will be alive by the end of the 21st century? Somebody would like to guess? I bet you don't know unless you really know. How many people worldwide will be at the end of the 21st century? What do you think? Guess. How much? 15? We'll go less. Okay. Another guess? 20 billion. You're very active at night, Etsy. All right. I'm sorry. I was trying to do an Israeli joke. I hope I didn't offend you. Well, I'll give you the highest estimate that there is now in the literature and the lowest estimate. Okay? I believe we will be, reach more to, we will be somehow near the lowest estimates, not the highest estimates. Okay? So we're speaking about at best 11 billion people, which means humanity in any case is going to stop growing. And probably we're going to shrink to about 6 billion people. Now if this is the 21st century, that means the 21st century is going to be totally different than the 20th century. How is it exactly going to be different? That's the endeavor now of a lot of people worldwide. Just around this chart, there are libraries that are being written, trying to understand the impact of this, what we call metatrend. It's not even a megatrend, it's a metatrend. Okay, how is it going to play out in terms of economies, in terms of world conflicts, in terms of family structure, in terms of technology, etc., etc. Okay? Now, actually, what really defines our very personal life, it's not the numbers, but the reasons of these numbers, behind these numbers. So I'm going to give you just a few samples, just a few examples of the reasons behind those figures. I'm not speaking about trends, I'm speaking about facts. At this very moment, worldwide, for every 100 females, there are already 117 males. As far as we know, this is the first time that there are more males than females worldwide. What does it mean? What? Less children. That's right. That's right. But still, there are a lot of things that can, happen because of this trend. Just think about 17% of humanity without a biological horizon. Think about the energy that is going to dissipate. Well, that's exactly the issue. I'm going to show you. I have written a book about world conflicts that are going to probably characterize the 21st century. This is just one of the variables that are shaping those kind of conflicts, and you're right. Okay, actually, we have a list of 10 reasons why probably the population is going to shrink by the 21st century. Not all those reasons really explain the phenomena. It's much bigger than all of us to understand. Okay, it happens, by the way, most of the time this is what characterized the third world. Okay, in the Western cultures, industrialized nations, there is a balance between the gender ratio. For example, in Israel, we're speaking about 51%, 49% for males and females. Most of the time, there are more females than males, and one reason is because you girls have 4 or 5 more years in their life, in your life expectancy than us. Okay? Anyway, this is also in different places worldwide. The other example is really is being reflected already in Western cultures and industrialized nations. As far as we know, really, it's very hard to understand how come it's happening. One reason we just figured out just lately, we found that for millennia there were more miscarriages of boys than girls. Okay, and that's why for millennia there were more women on this planet than males. Okay, nowadays nobody's speaking about infant mortality, so we have change that ratio. We will take care of it later on in the 22nd century. But in the 21st century, it's going to shape a lot of things. Okay? So this is what we call the average worldwide ratio. It doesn't say a lot. What I would like to see, for example, is how this ratio is being reflected, for example, in the Middle East and in Israel, because it's going, of course, to have a lot of impact. So what I'm doing is I'm analyzing a very specific group of people. I hope you understand this group will be around at least another 60 years. So we can say a lot of things about the next 60 years. All right? So let's say in Israel, for example, already at this point, the ratio between genders at this age group is already 5% more boys than girls, which is going to play out in different ways. From let's say, family structure, the status of, let's say, how is it called here? LBGs. Okay, a lot of things are happening because demographies behind it are the driving force of it. It's not just ideas or ideologies, etc., etc. Okay. Take, for example, in Egypt, they have also 5% more males than females at this age group, but there is a great difference between Israel and Egypt. Here in Israel, we have what we call social mobility. I can be one day with this girl, the other day with that girl. There, it's either you're married or not. Where does that energy dissipate? It will dissipate somewhere. So if you really want to understand some frightening phenomena, for example, in the Arab world around Israel, not only around Israel, think about that phenomena of people of 40, 50 years old that are marrying a 10-year-old girl. Where is it coming from? This is it. Okay? Because the pool of females is so tiny, well, then they grab from that pool as early as possible, because of course when you are 40, 50 years, you have still some money to pay for it. Okay, take for example in Jordan, exactly like Palestinians. Okay, take a look for example in Syria. Okay, but take a look at this in Saudi Arabia. Okay, by the way, in the general population they have 27% more males than females. Only in this very specific age group they have already 20% more males than females. One of the reasons it happened to Saudi Arabia is because they've been using a technology, a very simple technology, by the way, that have already changed your and my very personal life. Somebody would like to guess? One of the reasons is a very simple technology. Ultrasound. A very simple technology have changed world politics. Why? Because if you are a leader and you see those figures, you might say, I didn't see anything. At the end, you'll pay the price. If you're a leader and you see those figures, you cannot ignore them. Everybody's looking at you. They're looking for, your leadership. So what we tend to do as futurists is to analyze the options that are on the table in a specific place, a specific culture, specific religion, etc., etc. We tend to organize those options into very small clusters. And we say, for example, here in Saudi Arabia, they have 3 options. First option, we tend to give it, a reliability. And we'll say, first option is 60%, that this is what a leader 20 years from now is going to do. The second option, 30%. And then there is always a third option, which we say, a crazy leader will take over, and then 10%, that's what he or she will do. And that's how we are trying to figure out what leaders of the future will be doing. Most of the people think that leaders are doing whatever they want in their mind. That's not true, believe me. Leaders are being put in horrible constraints, and they are forced to follow a certain path that those constraints are embedding, are really forcing them to go through. And we knew what the Saudis will do 30, 40 years ago, and that's what they did, and they brought havoc worldwide. Somebody would like to try to see what they did? No? This is what they did. They are awakening now. It's called madrasas. These are religious schools mainly for boys, but also for girls. And the reason is that more than 20% of those boys will not have a spouse, a mate for their entire life cycle. It's a frightening energy, specifically for rulers that are not exactly democratic. So what should they do? Should they, establish universities for those kind of kids? The only option they had was to invest billions of dollars. Really, they pour billions of dollars into those kind of institutes and ask their qadis, their rabbis, to bring down that energy. The outcome of that process is what we call fundamentalism. The outcome of fundamentalism is Al-Qaeda and world terror. And here you have a different view to the reasons or the driving force behind terror. It's not ideology, but biology. Okay? So it's only another way to see things. It's not the only way. But it's something that nobody is discussing. If you really want to solve the problem, you better go down as much as possible. And it doesn't say that we really understand things. Okay? Alright. Let me give you another mega trend. Okay? It's called the fertility rate. Okay? In order for a society to develop, grow, and etc., a female needs to have in her life cycle 2.1 kids. More than that, everything is growing. Less than that, everything is shrinking. Okay, the 0.1 is crucial. I really don't know exactly how you do it, girls, but it's crucial. Okay? Take a look at the beginning, at the 50s. Okay? 2 or 3 kids on average. Take a look at China. 6 more kids. They panic. They do their one-child policy, and they destroyed the prospect of the 21st century. Now, most of the people think China is well. I always, try to calm down those kind of people, because what they do is they do linear extrapolation. They are not aware that systems are evolving in very bizarre curves, ups and downs. Okay, people tend always to say, "What the heck? Don't you see how China is, getting powerful, and this is the superpower of 21st century?" I always try, to calm down those kind of people, because I said, just take into account the next statistics. For example, In about 20-25 years in China, they will have 40 to 45% of their population of the age of 65 and older, without no social nets. Okay, with one kid, and that kid is our slave nowadays. Okay, just think if the government over there will be able to take care of 1.5 billion people. They will take care, of course, of 500 million people in the shores. But the inland, who's going to take care of those people? So probably the kids that are working now in a lot of manufacturing processes, they will just leave those places and go take care of their kids, because this is the East. It's not exactly the West. It's not the Italian that will stick in his mother's house up to 60 years old. Okay? Take a look at nowadays figures. Most of the world is behind the fertility rate. 2.1 is the fertility rate. Not the fertility, the replacement rate. Okay? There are some nations that are awakening to see that it's not exactly what the experts were telling us during the last 50 years. Because in the last 50 years, the experts were telling us that the major challenge of humanity in the 21st century is what? Population explosion. In actuality, it's exactly the opposite. Okay? Think about the same issue. I'm just hinting. Okay? I'm not sure what I'm going to say. The same thing a lot of experts are saying nowadays, that the most, devastating ecological issue of nowadays is ecological. What? Exactly. Okay? I'm not sure the way they are doing their models is reliable. Okay? Because things might go differently. Okay? I'm just thinking. Alright, and take a look at the end of the 21st century. Very few nations are really having the guts to change direction. Because you girls, really, we don't need any more kids. That's it. Alright, let's go here. Take a look at something really that is going to impact the world in the next decade. And I'm going again just to hint about things. I don't have time to elaborate. Take for example Russia. People keep asking me, did you foresee that Putin will invade Georgia and invade Ukraine and Crimea, etc.? I said everything is written in the wall and also in my books. Russia. Okay, at the beginning of the 21st century, there used to be 140, 145 million people. However, in the first quarter of the 21st century, they are losing about 18 million people. In the second quarter, another 18 million people. From 140, 45 million, there will be between 105 to 110 million people in a matter of just half a century. They are going to lose a third of their population just in a matter of 1 century. If you think that Russia will not act because of that, then we didn't learn anything from history. And they will be very much aggressive to push back in order to have other population they look like them, in order to look for new markets, etc., etc. Okay, this is the theory. I'm looking also for very specific events that really that are reflected from that theory or support that theory. I'll give you just a hint. Putin, a few years ago, invests a lot of money and establishes a new youth movement in Russia. Very aggressive youth movement. Very nationalistic. The nationalism is growing in those kind of times. They are called in Russia, in Russian, they are called Nashi, which means, Nashi means in Russian, ours. However, we have other ears. It sounds like Nazis. Exactly, and we better learn from our best. Because I don't want to learn 50 years after something happens what was exactly the driving force of the Nazis. The most cultured nation, how come they became so cruel? I want to see it before it happens, and to see if I can bring down the flames as much as possible. It doesn't say I'll be able to bring down the flames, but I'll try. At least I'll try. Okay, let me give you then the Middle East, picture. During the 50s, they used to have all over the world, the Muslim world and the Arab world, they used to have 6, 7 kids on average. They even developed a narrative that they will be able to overcome everybody else with their womb. Well, what happened exactly is that they have destroyed their future because of it. Whatever you see nowadays in the Arab world is because of that explosion, if you wish, of fertility rate. Because you cannot manage a country with such a growth in fertility. You need a lot of investment in education, in infrastructures, in almost anything. And they could not do it at the right pace. And therefore, what you see in Egypt, what you see in Syria, what you see in different places is actually a collapse of society because mainly of this variable. Okay, you see nowadays almost all of them went back to 2, 3 kids on average. Okay, they are trying very hard, by the way, to bring it much more down. People really are not aware of it. In Egypt, they are just, giving free condoms to boys in order to bring it down as much as possible. All right? You can see here, by 2050, barely going, below or up a little bit in the middle of the replacement rate. You can see by the end of the 21st century, still they are not recovering. It has a lot of pros and cons. I don't have time even to start, elaborating on the impact of those numbers on the 21st century. I will just hint a little bit here. If you wish, take a look at what happened to Iran, from about 7 kids to less than 2 kids. And there are a lot of things that can be explained because of this number. The way they are aggressive, the way they would like maybe to develop a bomb, etc., etc. Okay, let's go now to the Jewish people. We got some idea about the 21st century. Let's see now what's happening within the Jewish people. Again, I'm going to give you a very large perspective, as much as we can. Okay, if you wish, I'm taking some of the data from this book that was published lately, even also in English. Actually, what I did in that book is a methodology we call a retrospection. Okay, we do it with different methodologies, but this is a nice methodology. I actually said to myself, if I were in 1910, and I had in my hand a reliable methodology that its predictive reliability is 60%. I don't need more than that. Could I have predicted at least 60% of what happened between 1914 to 1948? Think about 1910. If somebody could have come and said, I have a methodology with 60% reliability. And that methodology says that in a few years, there's going to be a horrible war. It will be recorded in history as World War I. How many people died in World War I? About, it depends who's asking, okay? But we're speaking about between 16 million people to 30 million people. Okay? Think about if somebody came and said, in a matter of only a decade, by 1920, major superpowers are going to dissipate. The Ottomans, the Brits. In only a matter of 20 years later, much horrible war. It will be recorded as World War II. How many people died in World War II? 70 million people. 2/3 civilians out of those 70 million people. Now, I'm not sure I could have, saved somebody. That's another issue. I can say a lot of things about the future, nobody will listen, I know that. Okay, that's another human problem. So I said to myself, if I had a methodology with which I could have figured out at least 60%, I'll take that methodology and at the beginning of the 21st century, I'll implement it and try to see what comes up. And what came was a book. And from that book, I'm taking just a chapter to describe what's going to happen in Israel also, and worldwide Jewry. As I mentioned, I was, in the last 2-3 decades, I was collecting a lot of studies that were being done in the last century, trying to figure out the future of the Jewish people and the future of Israel. All of those predictions have totally missed reality. And as I said, probably the reason is because they have used a non-reliable methodology. And I was looking for a methodology that at least will double the reliability of the linear extrapolation. I don't need 80 or 90 or, of course, not 100% reliability because I'm not a prophet. Even a prophet is not 100% reliable. We all know that. So you can just, take a look at different people that were trying to figure out the future of the Jewish people. I don't have time again to go because just think that around each of those studies, there were great debates at the time. There were even wars between sects and movements within the Jewish people, within the Zionist movement. Up to today, we have a lot of debates, a lot of zets, if you wish, because everybody is relying on different numbers, everybody is relying on different vision, everybody is analyzing the trends in different ways. Nobody, whenever they speak about the future, nobody is mentioning their methodology or their reliability of their methodology. Okay? All right, I think that's enough. A lot of. This one is really good. This one is really good. Okay? Even up to today. So let's see the history of Jewish people. In terms of demographies, and as I said, demography is really the faith variable. How many Jews were in Israel 3,000 years ago? At exactly the time of King David. 3,000 years ago. How many Jews were in Israel?
2.5 million.
2.5 million. Who said that? Danny? Well, that's the religious narrative.
What a surprise!
I'm from Bar Ilan. I'm also Orthodox, but still, it's illogical that there were 2.5 million people at the time, because 2.5 million at the time, you need infrastructures, you need water, you need agriculture that did not exist at the time. Even if you take a look at Ir David, okay, the city of David, how many people were at the capital at that time? Barely 10,000 people. So even the commentaries are speaking about those 60 ribo, it's a symbol, it's not exact numbers. All right? We have to be very careful. It used to be a nice figure to say during 2,000 years of diaspora. Now we are much more, a little bit educated. Anyway, so how many people from a scientific point of view. Half a million. Correct. Okay? About 300,000 people, as far as we know. There are ways to calculate exactly this number. I'm not going to discuss it now. Okay? That's 3,000 years ago. Now let's move forwards in history. How many Jews worldwide about 700 years ago? 700 years ago, a very important time in Jewish history. It's called the Golden Age. Okay? What do you think? How many Jews? Yeah, now you are afraid to guess. That's nice. Good. Danny, come on, Danny. You were in this lecture, just don't remember.
3 million. Yes, 500,000.
500,000.
2 million.
2 million. Another guess? 3 million. Sold. Okay. There you go. By the way, out of those 1 million people, about 70% were in Spain. That was Manhattan of the time. Excuse me, Sydney of the time. Okay? Never, of course. Oh my God, I'm in trouble now. I'm in trouble. Okay. Anyway, and 500 years ago, okay, half of those 70% were expelled. Okay, we are the descendants of those 350,000 people, and the other half were disappeared, assimilated. Nowadays they are awakening because, you know, it's a little bit interesting and attractive to be in Israel. All right, that's 500 years ago. How many Jews were 200 years ago worldwide? Come on, guys, Zionist movement. You should know. 5 million. Great, almost. There you go. 3 million Jews. Okay, again, as far as we know, nobody was counting, okay? But these are the scientific estimates. And then something unusual happened. In a matter of 140 years, how many Jews were worldwide before World War II?
60 million.
Again, it depends who's okay? Now, let's stretch it a little bit. If you take into account even the minority report somewhere, okay? We're speaking about something like 18 million Jews, okay? Now, bear with me here. Now, bear with me. I'm going to say something not so easy. Between here and here, world population went from 1 billion to 3 billion people. European population went from 200 million to about 500 million people. By the way, out of those 18 million Jews, 12 million were in Europe, including Turkey. Okay? So, the Jews did what? Now I'm going to say something really very harsh. Think about if there was a futurist in 1930. The numbers, the figures are already clear. Now I don't think somebody could have imagined a reaction against this growth as the Holocaust. Okay? But a reaction against this growth? Of course, there is no system that can bear, that can hold such a growth. There will be always a reaction against it. Pogroms were probably most probable thing that could have been imagined or predicted at the time. Of course, we received a reaction that was worse than pogroms. And we lost a third of the Jewish population, about half of the European population. Okay? How many Jews worldwide at this point in time?
14.
14. Okay. Well, according to one authority that I'm, somehow following, his name is Professor de la Pergola. Okay, from Hebrew U. He is really doing the real research. The others are just estimating. specifically federations all over the world. Okay? What he says is as follows, indeed. We are just started to recover from the most devastating crisis we had in the last 2 millennia. Just started to recover. Okay? Now, if you really want to understand the psyche of the Jewish people in 2017, bear with me with the next two figures. If there was no Holocaust, and there was a Jewish state, how many Jews would have been in 2017? 50. Oh, you're just guessing. Okay, just guessing. All right. Okay. Professor Anita Shapira from Tel Aviv University. She's doing statistical regressions. There are ways to do it, okay? She speaks about 34 million Jews. Look how heavy it is on our very small shoulders. 34 million Jews. If there was no Holocaust and there was a Jewish state. Another figure. If there was a Holocaust and there was no Jewish state, how many Jews would have been now? 9 million. According to Anita Shapira, between 6 to 7 million Jews. Israel saved the Jewish people. This is our historical context. And we really don't understand the scope of this time in history. Because if you continue the trend, you see something unusual. What you see is that in 48, how many Jews were in Israel? We should know.
600.
Okay, all right. How many Jews in Israel now?
6.2.
Jews.
6.2.
Okay. For the first time, after 2,500 years, 2,500 years is exactly the destruction of the first temple. Okay? For the first time, after 2,500 years, the largest Jewish community resides in Israel. And we are about 6.5 million. It depends, if you wish, if you count also some that are a little bit, you know, you go to 6.8 million. Before World War II, the largest Jewish community was in Poland, about 3 million Jews, and then it moved to the US for many, many years. Now in the US, there are barely 6 million Jews. And we have passed. By the way, I have just written a book about this figure and the meaning of this figure for the 21st century. We have passed a landmark that is going to change everything. A century from now, Jewish identity is going to be different. Jewish religion is going to be different. Our history is going to be different. We have passed that landmark. We barely even read about it in newspapers. But a century from now, when they will be studying what exactly happened and when it started to happen, they will say 2016. Maybe I will have some opportunity this week in Melbourne to discuss exactly the meaning of it, but I don't have time. Now I'm going to discuss just the challenges, not the meaning of this as I see it, as I see them. In any case, we are just 45–46% of world Jewry now that reside in Israel, which is by all means a landmark. However, how many Jews will be worldwide and in Israel by 2050? You guess, don't worry, you can guess. Try. By the way, I'm using a pedagogical trick. I'm asking a question, I know you don't know the answer, I give the answer and you remember the answer. Because there are a lot of, numbers here and it's hard to remember. So, how many in 14, okay. Worldwide and in Israel. Okay, what do you think? By the way, the Neiman Institute in the Technion did this work. They did, of course, whenever we do those kind of studies, we do the highest estimates and the mid estimates and of course, the lowest. I'll give you the middle ground estimates. Okay, it can be 2 million plus or minus. This is what they say in Neiman Institute. which means it's going to take a century plus minus to recover from the Holocaust. However, are you with me? Before the Holocaust, 18 million Jews worldwide, 12 million in Europe. By 2050, 18 million Jews worldwide, 12 million Jews in Israel. This is the historical context. We are all, passing through. And it affects almost everything. Most of the time, we don't go back to the original, what we call the original driving force of history. This is the driving force of history. Okay? However, I'm very much interested of how many Jews will be worldwide and how many Jews will be in Israel by the end of the 21st century. Now we are afraid to guess. I don't think somebody can guess. Okay, take a look. I'm going to give you the figures that the UN is publishing. I believe it will be more than that. Okay? There you go. 24 million Jews, by the way, worldwide. Out of those 24 million Jews, probably 20 million in Israel.
Where?
Where? Where? מעולם לא אמר צר לי המקום. You know it. Okay? No, it was Israel as it is today was never populated as it is today. Never. And if you have taken a tour of Israel from above, you will see most of it is empty. Okay? There are some concentration, cities, etc., but doesn't matter. Anyway, if you wish, this is not my numbers. By the way, according to the Bureau of Statistics, the Israeli Bureau of Statistics, we will reach this point by 2065. Okay? So this is the 21st century of the Jewish people and Israel in one single chart. And it has infinite applications and implications. I don't think we have enough imagination to understand the scope of this trend. Okay? Let me just remind you, we are speaking about probability, which means the probability of those figures is about 80%. Things might be better, it might be even worse, but let's not speak about the other possibilities. 80% really, in order to change the probability of those trends, something really, really unusual should happen, which is even not a nuclear attack against Israel. Even a nuclear attack will not change this trend, but I believe that a nuclear attack even... I have to finish? Finish? I didn't start. Okay. Okay. Let me please just show you that it's not a very old population. It's a very young population with all its advantages. Okay, the median, you can see the difference between us. What I'm really interested in is what are the challenges that are being developing behind the scene because of this mega trend. And I believe there are two challenges that are ahead of us as a peoplehood, as a nation, and of course as a Zionist movement. Okay, I think I can skip this slide because we don't have time. Okay. Up to this very moment, the Jewish people in the last century was defining its covenant of destiny. The Zionist movement, 120 years ago, said the following: let's stop praying. I'm blunt a little bit, okay? Let's stop playing. Let's pick up a modern tool with which we will try to end the vicious cycles of atrocities against our people. And they came up with an idea which they termed Zionism, in order to build a homeland in which at least our horrible past fate will not repeat itself. Okay? We have done amazingly in that mission. However, when you go and you compare that process to other nations did the same thing. You see that a covenant of destiny, past destiny, is a glue that can hold different kinds of groups, because we were the really different kinds of groups, even different variations of religion. It's not the same thing. It's not really the same thing, you know, Reform movement, Orthodox movement, even the Haredi movement, they are fighting each other. We are not the same thing. We are coming from different places, different customs, different languages. What the Zionist movement said, let's forget about how we would like to see the Jewish state. Let's, first of all, combine our forces in order to build a homeland in which the destiny will not repeat itself. This is Brit Goral. However, when you compare it to other processes that other nations did, you see that the glue of Brit Goral, can hold for 2-3 generations. Most of the time, after 3 generations, that glue dissipates, and most of the time you have clashes between the groups that formed that Brit Goral. Most of the time there is an assassination of a leader. Most of the time there is a social upheaval that can be even, a civil war. In order for that entity to stick together for centuries in the future, they need to define what we call Brit Yehuda, the covenant of future mission. The problem is that that covenant needs to be so clear, so distinct, so unique, so short, so that 98% of the groups that form that entity will agree about that covenant and will strive to build the institutions to engage in really trying to realize that vision. We know of that process from different places. I'll just hint about other places. Okay? So what is it that we all feel that the Brit Goral, the covenant of our destiny, is in trouble? We feel it. We became, again, groups that are fighting each other. We still have, some challenges that are challenging our security. Thank God. Okay? But we are already in the process, in a progressive process, that glue is already dissipating. So what might be that covenant mission for a democratic state, a Jewish state? It's not a state for Jews. Two different things. Nobody knows what a Jewish state is. This is the first time in our history that we have to define it. It was never a state. It was a kingdom here, and it was a failure most of the time. So we need to define what is it, a mission, a covenant mission that can bring together the various groups that exist nowadays within the Jewish people, within the minorities that are part of the Israeli nation, etc., that can be modern enough for the 21st century, that can be democratic enough, that can take into account our past and take account humanity's vision and values, etc. I'll just mention some of the covenants that have been dominant in the last century in world history, and I believe that the mission that is in front of the Zionist movement is to define the covenant of future mission for the Jewish people in general worldwide and specifically in Israel. If we will not do it, the Zionist movement has ceased to do its role in history. And I'm very, very blunt. Take, for example, the US, they have defined it in a very simple way. And because of that, there was a civil war, and because of that, they established great institutions, and they are very active worldwide to convince people about that value. Take, for example, the French one. I know that the Australians don't like French people, but okay, the French are always much more sophisticated. They took 3 words, okay, and all right. But I speak about a value, a mission that can be summarized in 2 words. All right. The EU are trying nowadays to form a new entity in history. For centuries, they were slaughtering each other. World War II was frightening. They were shocked from what they could do in history. So after World War II, they said, let's form a new entity. And well, let's build it step by step. At the beginning, it's only financial issues, etc. And at the end, they will have to form a new entity around one value and a Brit, a Yehud, that will stick and will, bring together all the parties of the European parties. At the moment, they have on the table a suggestion. I'm not sure that's what they are going to decide upon, but at least they are thinking about it. This is what they are having on the table. They are discussing it, they are debating it. If they will decide that this is their covenant mission, then you'll see it everywhere in Europe, and of course on top of the euro. So I believe, as I said, that the world Jewry, and Israel specifically need to define a raison d'être. This is the word I could have found I found that describes the challenge. We need a raison d'être for a Jewish state that can bring together everybody in the world, all the sects, all the portions, all the movements worldwide and inside Israel, and strive to establish new ideas, new institutions, new values that derive from it. I've been working many years to try to figure out what might be such a phrase that everybody will accept. I don't think we are able to do it at this point in time. We are Dor Midbar, we are the transition generation. In order to be able to do it, you have to be really free. Freedom, you have to be, you don't have to go to Israel because it's a refuge place. If your mindset is just, a refuge place, then you are not a free person that can come up with a creative idea. It needs to be something that is somehow embedded in our tradition. It's reflecting the modern and 21st century humanity values. It needs to be unique, that our surrounding, that the world will say, wow, you are contributing something new to history. This is, I believe, the challenge. If we will not be able to do it, I believe we will do it. I believe that our kids will do it. I believe that those kids here that are 20 years old are the generation that is going to do it. They will be able to do it when about 50% or 70% of world Jewry will reside in Israel. Because there is something in the mindset that is deriving from the majority of the peoplehood that is in one place. In my late book, I didn't publish it. I suggest something. I can just hint about it and I'll finish. Okay. I'm not sure it's clear enough. I'm not sure, but I'm still working on it. I gave that book to some of my friends to read it. Some said, "Oh, you have to publish it." Some others said, "Don't even Don't even try it. People will kill you. Anyway, okay. Some people say, well, let's speak up startup nation. Startup nation, believe me, it can be better in New Zealand. It's not unique to the Jewish people. It needs to be unique. That everybody will say, wow, this is really you. That is something that is combining past, present, future. Okay? I'm suggesting something like that, procedural freedom. There is something embedded in our genes of procedures. We can really contribute to world history by enhancing the values that are deriving from procedures that are enhancing freedom, individual freedoms and collective freedoms. In my book, I'm trying to explain it. I'm not sure I did it very well. That's why I'm still hesitating to publish it. But we need a lot of people to come up with new ideas. That's the mission that exists before us. Let me just summarize. You see that Israel is part of a larger context. Okay? You've seen the context. The world is going through major challenges demographically. Israel is going to a very opposite challenge. By itself, it's an immense challenge. You just mentioned, how many people can that piece of land hold? Are we able to build a nation that will attract people that will be nice to live in? Packed with so many people. This is a huge challenge. Okay? The other challenge, of course, is a challenge of identity. Who we are exactly. What is it exactly? A Jewish state. Not a state for Jews. State for Jews, that's enough. Okay? The largest Jewish community, that's a good point. Now, everybody can feel free to be either in Israel, or in Australia, or in the US, or in New Zealand. Doesn't matter. We are free. And if something, God forbid, happens, there is a refuge place. There is a nation that can, somehow take care of some of the horrible things that might occur. That's not enough. Because, God forbid, if we will not be able to define the raison d'etre of a new entity, we are speaking about a new entity, then we might go through a civil war. We might even dissipate, and God forbid if we will dissipate. Nobody is assuring us anything in history. Unless you are really a great believer, then you believe that the third kingdom of you, if you wish, will not be destroyed. But you have to believe in this thing, in miracles. I think I can rest my case at this point. I hope you understand that I don't think there is a soul on this planet that can really understand the future. But at least we can analyze things in a manner that will give us some challenges, because we need challenges in any case. Thank you very, very much.